the other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
It's 2021 and Legends are back in the form of the brand new core class. The fandom is ablaze with celebration. Finally, after years and years of complaining, the Micromasters have been defeated. Rip in pepperoni, by the way. Everyone you meet dancing in the street all night long at that Hey Jumbo Jumbo Return of the Legends class. It's been away for a long time and now it's finally back. Legends fans have been starved, but finally hang on a minute. No, this isn't right. I'm sorry. I know people are really excited for these, but there have most certainly been options for Legend Scale fans in the years since. People didn't just stop getting small scale figures when War for Cybertron rolled around. Oh no. I think it's time we shed light on the return that nobody ever seems to talk about. Although to be fair, it did come from the most unlikely of places. Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown and today's diagnosis pertains to Cyberverse Battle Class, Spark Armour, Sky-Byte with Driller Drive, and Jetfire with Tank Cannon. Now to be fair, I do understand why this subline and subclass of figures is often glossed over. Firstly, the show itself. Cyberverse's first season was fairly unremarkable, and as such many people fell off pretty quickly, opting to follow the Netflix show instead. A tragedy if I do say so myself. Doesn't matter that the second season was pretty damn good and the third season was absolutely stellar, most people just weren't interested. Secondly, the toys themselves. The majority of Cyberverse figures were ruddy terrible, which means that when good toys actually showed up, they were released to little fanfare. Kids are eating these up, they're highly successful, but in terms of the mature fandom, yeah, I can see why people would be skeptical. Third, they were easily overshadowed by the recently released deluxe lineup. Especially considering the peak of that subline was the first wave, you can quickly see why people would just forget about the existence of these. In fact, I've already covered one of the Battle Class releases last year, and aside from the typical nonsense, many people express their disinterest in a smaller package when there's a superior larger version being released alongside it. Kinda funny how those criticisms turn into praises when we're dealing with anything to do with G1. The Transformers fandom, ever the group of hypocrites. Perhaps it's partially my fault though, maybe I didn't properly convey the appeal of these little guys, so let's take another swing at it. Why Sky-Byte and Jetfire specifically? Well, not only do these two offer a good look at both ends of the quality spectrum, but canonically they share a bitter rivalry that spans the cosmos. It's actually a neat little nod to West Side Story, funnily enough. That said, before jumping in, a few details about the figures' pricing need to be examined. Traditionally, Legends and Core Class figures cost 20 Aussie dollary-doos. Legion figures cost about 10, and given that each of these packages comes with a parts-forming armor vehicle, logically the price should be $30, right? Surprisingly, no, they actually retailed for around 25. This means that unfortunately, corners have been cut. As we go through these, a few wibbly sections are going to become apparent, considering we're dealing with a $15 Legends figure as opposed to one that's got a bit more breathing room. And starting off with Sky-Byte, you can see some of those sacrifices with the color breakup. If you're someone who's used to the more cohesive alternate modes of Legends and Core Class figures, this will look pretty jarring. The blue and yellow breakup at the back can easily be glossed over, but the front section, oh boy! It's nice that they've got a smidge of paint on the front, especially considering this is going to become the torso later on, but Christ, these blue kibble panels are super jarring. I'm not expecting thrilling 30 levels of cohesion here, but seriously looks like he's wearing a cardigan on a winter's day. It also pushes the profile right to the end of the chonk chart, and it ends up looking pretty comical with these tiny ass wings. Ultimately, this is definitely a shark that needs to lay off the pizza bagels at Emgo's house. That said, I kinda find this aesthetic adorable. Sky-Byte has always been a pretty humorous character, less so in Cyberverse surprisingly, but still not someone who specifically strikes fear into the hearts of anyone who lays eyes upon him. As a result, I think this pudgy ocean burrito really leans into his huggable charm. He's definitely more Hololive than Gamer Shark, but I find that perfectly alright. And even putting character aside for a second, it's just so adorable! After moving past all the cohesion nonsense, you realize they've done a fantastic job with the mechanical detail. Even excluding the chest details repurposed as mechanical shark parts, the face has a very nice shape to it. I kinda wish the mouth was slightly agape, but considering this is basically a Legends figure with a quarter of its budget slashed off, it's a pretty minor sacrifice. I really like how they've repurposed the hinges as torpedo racks. It's a neat little trick that I always love to see on Transformers. Sadly, these aren't blast effects compatible, and neither are the extra lasers down near the fins. But the back thruster is, so you can get some neat play functions that way, even if it looks like he's got a bad case of diarrhea. Come on, mate, I told you to lay off the pizza bagels! I also love how they've added in vent detail to mimic the gills on a real shark, even having the panels deliberately line up as they transform. And beyond that, the back section is filled with tons of carried over robot detail. This is one well-sculpted sharky, to the point where if Takara was still doing their own releases, I'd probably hunt one down. But alas, they do not, and the paint has taken a hit thanks to the budget cuts. But honestly, it's shocking how well this holds up in retrospect. You can tell it's not cut from the same cloth as Generations, but it still provides a damn nice alternate alternate mode. In fact, quite a few toys in this lineup offer the same experience. You'd expect these to be a lot worse for the price point, but surprisingly they do quite well. However, that's one side of the coin. When you get to the other, yeah, this is about what you'd expect. The unfortunate case with some of the figures in this line is that when it comes to the alternate modes, they kinda just gave up. Now granted, jet modes in concept aren't the easiest to do properly. Going from a sleek and slender vehicle mode to a blocky and humanoid figure means that you're always going to have an element of underkibble. This is just how it is, because whenever people try to work around it, the majority of the time it just doesn't work. Unless you're deliberately making a slender design like Jet Shatter or Prime Starscream, get ready to stick a robot on the bottom of a plane. We all understand it's fine. This isn't a case of that though. This is simply a case where the designers thought, well, we only have so much budget, so let's just have the robot lie down face up and add the wings. No one's gonna care, right? Well, considering the quality of the other alternate modes in this line, yes, even this thing, I think we can care without causing too much outrage. Now, to be fair, it's pretty easy to tell what this is supposed to be. It's at least got the bare necessities from the CGI model, which itself takes a hefty chunk from both the Macross original and the oh shit, we don't want a lawsuit altered G1 cartoon design. One of the things you can get away with when the original lawsuit falls flat. Yep, Harmony Golds legally cannot sue Hasbro for the same shit in the future. Get f***ed. The nose cone is designed pretty well, falling right into the blockier cartoon style. At the very least, they've molded in air intakes, even if they had to stop halfway due to budgetary constraints. These sections also line up pretty well with the existing chest detail, and once it all leads out to the wingspan, you can easily tell what they're going for. It's even painted extremely well, given the circumstances. But once you get behind the nose cone, things quickly take a nose dive. First up, the extra boosters are way too far forward. Given how these basically just form kibble in the robot mode anyway, there's essentially no reason dictating why these shouldn't be attached further back. It's screwed in at the front here, but there's no reason why these couldn't just be pegged on further back, or at least nothing I can see. At least they're blast effect compatible, I suppose. Yep. Now the arms, sure, they're bad. They're extremely obvious and such, but I can let these slide given the circumstances. Unfortunately, they were so dedicated to robot mode accuracy that they basically gave up on the legs. Had they deviated from the design and made these a little blockier, we could have easily let the other issues slide. But nope, gotta set the priorities elsewhere. And I know a bunch of people will tell me to lay off this figure, claiming that I'm being too harsh on a toy meant for really little kids. But here's the thing, looking at the other figures in this lineup, I know they can do better. Sky-Byte is great. Shockwave is also great. Although you all seem to have some kind of allergy to crab tanks. You do you, I guess. Plus beyond that, with how well the front is done, you can see moments of brilliance. There are great design elements here, but they're all bogged down with stupid decisions. Like, mate, he's got foldable front landing gear and a dedicated stand port for high-flying display action. The designers knew what they were doing here. They wanted to make a toy that was fun for both kids and collectors. And sure, it's a Legends figure with its budget slashed down to 2/3. But even so, compared to the rest of the line, it just falls a smidge short. Not as short as the worst figure of the lineup, but still short. Not saying Starscream is bad, by the way, just that he's the weakest of the six. So pretty much right off the bat, we can see what this line is capable of and what it sometimes turns out being. Unfortunately, it actually ended up reaching its potential a lot more than it didn't. There were way more figures in this line similar to Sky-Byte than there were to Jetfire, and given the budgetary constraints, kudos. Of course, that may change with the transformation, but honestly, I doubt it. The transformations with these two are basically on the same level as many of the Legends class Transformers. Pretty simple, but pretty effective, except in this guy's case, but you get the point. They're not quite as complex as some of the modern core class figures, but they're just fine for what they are. And considering how much budget's been slashed from them, it's really commendable what they've been able to do here. Of course, Sky-Byte follows the general Sky-Byte transformation, where you get a few panels here, a few bits here and there, a few arms and legs here and there, done deal. If I'm being honest, I think this transformation is more satisfying than the Thrilling 30 version. Now, to be fair, that's not saying much. Personally, I found the Thrilling 30 version kinda but this is a really good update on Sky-Byte, and to come out of Cyberverse of all things, it's pretty commendable. First thing you want to do is bring up these kibble panels like so. Come around to the back and separate the legs from there. It's nice that they've really cleverly tucked away the tabs for the legs right there, so this thing does spin, but you never notice the tabs there. It's a brilliant way of disguising things. Anyway, the torso rotates and folds into place and locks in nice and solidly. Come to the feet and fold them out, and damn, those are some hefty ankle supports. Come around to the back and separate the arms. You've got these shoulder hinges that come into place. They don't lock, but they get the job done. Bring the ball joints around, and the arms don't really need reorientation because they're already in the right position anyway, so that's all good there. Bring down the backpack, fold up the head, and it sort of clips over a little tab there and then sits on top of the tab, so it doesn't lock in place, but it works just fine. And last but not least, you just kind of orient these as best you can. Sadly, this doesn't push in and lock in properly. That would have been a really nice thing to tie this whole thing together, but for the most part, it's a bloody fantastic Sky-Byte Transformation that forms a really clean robot mode. Like, Jesus Christ, that's something you'd expect from a full Legends class Transformer, not something that had their budget slashed in half thanks to accessories that needed to be packed in. Really good job. Sadly, can't really say the same for Jetfire over here, who's just a bit of a mess. Like, there's some interesting ideas on show here, and if they were just refined a little bit, it could be an amazing transformation. But since they skimped on everything and said, it'll do, it just ended up being not shit per se, but definitely lackluster. First thing you want to do is bring the fists out from there. The fists are 5mm, and you've got 5mm pegs there, keeping everything in place. That will allow you to extend the legs like so. They don't really lock into place very well. It's a bit wibbly. That's a bit of a bummer. Of course, you separate them, and you can bring the feet up, which also don't lock into place. They just kind of wibble back and forth, back and forth. Again, locking points. It's something that's super easy. I've seen Legion class figures do it recently. Well, recently in the sense of this marathon, not recently in terms of what's come out. But it's just little things like that that could have really brought this together. Anyway, make sure the landing gear's all the way in, and you take the nose cone and bring it over the back like so, which gives you a dramatic head reveal, which I suppose is nice. Yes, this means technically the chest is faux, but on a figure this size, who cares? Last but not least, you bring these into place here, and these do actually have locking points, so I will give them credit for that. And you bring the arms down like that. So nothing truly heinous in this transformation, but it's just missing something. Like the solidity in the legs and just the way the arms clean up, it's not very clever. And those bits ultimately overshadow the great ideas, such as the awesome head reveal, the fact that these wings fold around pretty neatly. There's a lot that could have been done fantastically, but in the end, it's just a boring transformation. So in the end, I think it's pretty easy to tell which of these is the better one. And these represent both ends of the spectrum that you can get in the line. You've got really clever but really effective transformations, such as with Sky-Byte, and kind of basic bullshit like with Jetfire. Basic underdone bullshit, I should clarify. That's not to say either of these are bad. I mean, this is of course great, and this is just okay, I guess. Ultimately, if you're in love with this design, there's not much that'll really turn you off of it, but if I had to recommend one based on the transformation alone and based on everything, I'd easily pick Sky-Byte in a heartbeat. It's just a super easy decision to make. In robot mode, you can tell where the priorities of these figures lay. Sky-Byte has a much more cohesive color scheme, and Jetfire actually looks complete. Although that terminology may be a little dubious. Ultimately, I get this decision. Kids are going to want their toys to look exactly like they do in the show. I still see complaints on social media that G1 reflectors didn't look the same as the 1984 cartoon. Yeah, not the Siege update, the OG mail order G1 toy. Some people never stop complaining, I guess. Personally, I still think messing with the limbs on Jetfire could have made the whole package better, but whatever, we have what we have. And in the case of Sky-Byte, what we have is actually really awesome. Seriously, this is a robot so good that it even puts some of these Cyberverse deluxes to shame. No, not the Warriors, the deluxes. The helmet sculpt is spot on, with plenty of paint and hella swish detail. When they need to be swooshing, they execute it perfectly, and when they need to get sharp, they do so to an exceptional point. Pun very much intended. Sadly, the face itself is only average, not just because it's not painted to the same level, but also because it doesn't really capture his eccentric thespian characteristics, but oh well. The overall package still looks pretty great. Unfortunately, due to some of the budget constraints, there's no posability whatsoever, but it's a minor blemish on an otherwise great robot. The torso that sits below it also does really well. Despite his diminutive stature, they've managed to make the proportions fairly spot on. You even notice details that kinda just blended in previously, such as the extra vent details on the shoulders. Very nice touch. The legs are also sculpted wonderfully, with every vent pushing the gill aesthetic, tying the whole thing together. Even the thighs look fantastic, which is astonishing given most Transformers kinda cheap out on them in comparison to the shins, and well, everything else. And despite having a pretty substantial backpack, he still stands damn well thanks to the sturdy as heel supports. After a bunch of recent examples that seem to forget the importance of Transformer heels, this is a wonderful breath of fresh air. There is so little I can find fault with here, especially considering the size of the figure and what you're paying for. Plus, each floor is balanced out with something that works really well anyway, so you quickly forget about such things. Again, the head doesn't turn, but the head sculpt is amazing as is. Same with the thighs. He's articulated pretty well, especially above the waist, but once you get further down, you realize he doesn't have a thigh swivel. Normally, I'd be pretty pissed off by this fact, but then you take a look at how well these are designed and it doesn't really matter. Plus, plenty of Legends figures prior to Sky-Byte's release, and even a few after admitted such. Of course, I was more harsh on some of those examples given they had more budget to work with, but under the circumstances here, I think it's a pretty easy thing to let slide. And sure, the backpack doesn't lock in anywhere, just kinda sitting there, but my word, what a fantastic backpack it is. It's really cool how they were able to deviate from the screen model and turn an otherwise annoying part of the figure into a main feature. Seriously, Absolutely, more design should do this. The only issue I can actively hold against this fellow is the tolerance on the left elbow. Ugh, kinda feels weird saying tolerance in singular form. So used to saying tolerances, not used to that. Ugh. Anywho, this thing is way too loose, which means posing the claw weapon is a pain in the ass. And mind you, this isn't the figure getting loose over time, like with some previous examples. Fun fact, I'm writing this review the same day I released the Cultor episode, so I've got that video in the back of my mind as I write this. But no, this joint was like this out of the box, and it's a real shame because this is a wonderful weapon design. It even expertly hides the pegs required for the transformation. The designers knew what they were doing here. Wait, shit, I just noticed mine has a stress mark. No idea how that got there. I only just noticed whilst I was writing the script. That's a bit disappointing. Anywho, I know I can easily fix the joints later, but I really shouldn't have to, especially on a figure that's meant for kids. Joints should automatically work on a figure meant for a younger demographic. Actually, to be frank, joints should just work, period. Nobody wants loosey-goosey elbows out of the box. But even so, this is an absolutely wonderful Sky-Byte figure. I was initially skeptical about this release since my experience with the Thrilling 30 version was less than ideal, but this figure has blown me away at every single turn. I've wanted to talk about this figure for ages because it's easily the best figure in the size class. I'm really glad to have finally explained his brilliance because that's truly what he is. Brilliant. Sadly, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Jetfire is just okay. I don't think this is a bad robot mode by any means, but after all the sacrifices the Jet mode made, damn, this thing turned out boring. The head sculpt is basically just a mishmash of different aesthetics, a chiseled chin but a boxy helmet with earmuffs? Now, I'm not one to go absolutely nuts over accuracy, at least not to the same level as other people, but looking at the screen model you can see why this design doesn't work. The helmet is supposed to be painted black to differentiate it from everything else. In this sea of white, that's completely lost. So for me, it's not that it's not accurate, but rather that what they're doing is actively worse than what they're trying to emulate. It looks closer to an Authentics design than a Season 2 Cyberverse one. You know, the design's so bad even the showrunners massively modified them to make them work in the animation style. And the same really applies to everything else. The sculpt work is technically accurate, but without paint and color breakup to pick out anything, it ends up feeling flat and uninteresting, falling short of both accuracy and being generally aesthetically pleasing. The chest is a great big block of nothing. I should hypothetically be into this thanks to the huge vent details taking center stage, but I honestly never noticed these. It just feels like a giant rectangle. Same with the shoulders. These should fall right into the classics-like cylindrical chunk category, but instead they're just kinda there as amorphous shoulder blobs, blending in with the ill-defined forearms below. And you want to talk about poorly defined pieces? Well, look no further than the legs. These were the entire reason for the alt mode being as shit as it was, and how do they end up? Well, you know how G1 fans often complain that the movie designs are incomprehensible messes without any clearly defined features? That's exactly the feeling I get from the legs here. They're just sort of there with a bunch of random details splotched on the top. You can kind of make out the iconic leg rocker pods if you use an electron microscope covered with an ultraviolet filter, but without paint it just feels like the designer rushed this out in a day. But hey, at least the backpack is pretty neat. Hooray, motherfucker! This figure is lackluster in a unique way amongst this size class. He lacks any and all personality, which is honestly rare for not just the battle class, but Legends figures in general. Sky-Byte exudes a sort of ferocity, even if that's not quite what his character is known for. Ratchet comes across as down-to-earth, and Shockwave is menacing as f***. Even the worst figure out of the bunch, Starscream, still gets the point of the design across pretty well. Jetfire, on the other hand, is such a nothing figure, and it's really sad. This size class is capable of so much more and is not even aiming for what's standard. The articulation is pretty bad too. Technically he has roughly the same level as Ratchet and Prowl, but with all this lifeless mechanical detail, none of it accomplishes much. At least you can fan mode the thrusters over the top to mimic shoulder cannons, although sadly the fun factor of this wears off quickly. Oh, and his knees don't peg him properly. They always fall apart when you try to move the legs. Christ, there's just no way to have fun with this guy, is there? So ultimately, the difference in not just quality, but also care is explicitly clear. Jetfire is just another Legends figure, designed to fill the Wave and Liner Kid's pocket, whereas Sky-Byte is a testament to what the size class is capable of. If I had to recommend one right off the bat, my decision would be pretty obvious. However, these two still have one more trick up their sleeves. Season 2 of Cyberverse saw Hasbro jamming another pointless gimmick down the designers and the consumers' throats. The Spark Armour. I've actually covered a toy with this gimmick in the past, although to be honest, I think that toy ultimately did it better due to properly realized integration and, well, I'll play the clip again.
Optimus Prime, activate your Spark Armour, you f***ing asshole!
Of course, before all of these integrated fellows, we had to deal with combining vehicles, which made very little sense in the context of the show and ultimately came across as being rather ham-fisted. That aside, Sky-Byte comes with a driller drive and Jetfire comes with a tank cannon. With names like that, trademark assurance is, well, assured. Of course, these things are very simple. Take Sky-Bytes, for instance. It's cohesive enough, sure, but you can tell they haven't really put a lot of effort into creating a clearly defined chassis. It has a drill and wheels, sure, but everything else back here just kind of blends together. A far cry from the clean and concise nature of the core robots. I'll give credit where credit is due, though. The paint usage is pretty resourceful. They've done all the wheels and the entirety of the drill in a color that's halfway between black and gunmetal, whilst still retaining the metallic fleck of the latter color. It works surprisingly well and goes a long way to making this thing look neither cheap nor tacky. But alas, it's still not the greatest in terms of profile or cohesiveness. You can tell the priorities were on the main robot, and honestly, I respect that. I'd rather have a damn fine base robot than a disappointing one with an amazing accessory. Basically, I prefer figures similar to buzzworthy core class Bumblebee, who's worth his price now more than ever due to his worldwide price drops. And sure, it would be nice for both pieces to be awesome. Shockwave was able to do that pretty well, but if it's one or the other, I'll take the solid core robot any day. Unfortunately, Jetfire didn't get the memo because his tank fellow is actually quite awesome. It is, essentially, a simple but effective tank. That might not seem like much, but comparing him next to the others reveals him to be the most cohesive mini-vehicle of the lineup, and consequently, the best. The detail on this thing is absolutely phenomenal, almost on the level of the recent core class Megatron. Much like the drill diver, he also reuses the gunmetal/black mixture on both the treads and the turret, although this one's a little closer to gunmetal in comparison. This time it's used on the cannon, and thanks to the careful breakup, it really helps this thing look realistic. And if you're a fan of blast effects, well, you're in luck. He's got a whopping 4 ports. I always love it when lines outside of War for Cybertron engage in this sort of compatibility, and I wish other lines would take advantage of blast effects more often. No, that doesn't count. The point is to be fun to play with, not failing at being accurate to an animator's Sakuga orgy. We really need new ones to hit the market too, as opposed to the umpteenth release of Omega Supreme. And sure, the turret hatch is a little oversized to account for the mask hiding inside, but thanks to the detail covering it, you're able to accept it a lot easier. And despite not being properly attached to the cannons, it sure as hell gives the illusion of such. Sadly, there's no rotation, but given the budget constraints, I don't think it's fair to expect such from a package like this. So obviously these aren't the most intense accessories in the world. They're not that big, definitely bigger than other accessories that charge way more for ultimately less, but they're not big enough to push the primary focus away from the core robots. Their combinations aren't much to write home about either. The larger fellows have automorph gimmicks that envelop the entire upper half of the robot, whereas these separate into chunks, a la Ultra Magnus armor pieces. In my eyes, this is a much better solution. This at least feels like you're engaging in the conversion, and no articulation is lost in the process. The end result, though, it's just okay. They're neat little bonuses due to their absurdity, but it's once again not much to write home about. Sky-Bytes is definitely the weaker of the two, but at least the color scheme matches up pretty closely. The yellows aren't exact, with the drill pieces having a more metallic yellow in comparison to the flat shades of the core robot, but as far as I can gather, the blues are identical. Most of the spark armor combinations are actually neat throwbacks to other Transformers in the franchise. For instance, Optimus Prime's is a reference to G2 Dreadwing. Sky-Bytes ends up going for a Nor reference, fitting given his celicomorphic origins. It's actually quite humorous seeing the head tucked away in there, just barely peeking out. Unfortunately, everything around it ain't so great. The torso really doesn't play well with a shark head. Although some slack has to be cut, since the same is true for the cohesion with almost every chest piece in the battle class lineup. Only Shockwave and Prowl managed to pull it off really well in the end. I really dislike the way the head cover just sits there though. Sure, it's also the same with every other figure, but this bugs me a lot more in general. There had to be a way to get this to fold up. The wheels are also completely useless. At least with the other figures, the arm pieces actually made sense. These are just there. Oh, well, at least he can pierce the heavens with his arm attachments. And yes, this is actually possible because the right arm doesn't have tolerances. Saying that just feels right again. Tolerances. Ultimately though, yeah, this is pretty poor. I've legitimately seen 3D printed upgrade kits that integrate better than this on figures that weren't even designed to accept them. I'm sure kids will get a kick out of it, but compared to the stellar robot mode, this just feels disappointing. Meanwhile, Jetfire continues down his road of confused priorities, because this is actually not bad. It's not perfect, mind you. You've still got to deal with the lack of cohesion in the chest and the bulbous tank cover chilling on the back of the head, but everything else is better than you'd expect. The arm pieces actually make sense here thanks to the incorporated blast effects ports. The functionality actually gives this arm a purpose. The handgun is also a much better addition than Sky-Byte's device that lets you believe in the you that believes in the me that believes in the pasta. And beyond that, you can use the 5mm port in the chest for some Iron Man chest blasting action. The colors also complement the white quite well. Would have been nice if the base colors were actually done properly, but credit where credit is due. Jeez, I keep saying that this script, it's a bit excessive. And the mask sculpt is hella mean. Going for a sort of samurai aesthetic with
missiles on the side of his helmets.
Christ, it'll give the Thrilling 30 Skids mold a run for its money. Sadly, I don't know what this is a reference to. People claim it's something out of Macross, but since I've never seen that show, I have no point of reference. I actually borrowed the DVD box set for that series, but gave it back before giving it a shot. Never found the time, sadly. Beyond the out-of-box combinations, you can of course mix and match most of the limb armaments. This accomplishes basically nothing in the grand scheme of things. Sadly, the main sections, those which house the chest plate and mask, are not cross-compatible. The torso pegs are different, so it won't always match up. You can't even swap the masks around. It almost looks possible, since the masks use similar peg systems between each other, but alas, each mask has a dedicated slot to fit into. It's just not designed to do that. Missed opportunity. However, fortunately, through the power of 5mm pegs, the limbots can be used with average War for Cybertron figures. And on top of that, the opposite is true. Battle class figures can get involved with combat, airlock, or fossil systems. Unfortunately, the combinations are about as stupid as the names for the systems themselves. And that brings us back to one key point. Well, it'll bring us back to one key point after a quick size comparison. This functionality, although the selling point of these sets for little kids, isn't really the main event. It's a fun bonus, sure, and one that actually fills out its price point, unlike some more recent examples. But ultimately, most of your playtime is going to be spent on the core robots themselves. As such, Sky-Byte easily takes the win here. He's a solid Legends figure that does a lot well in spite of his budget limitations. Sure, the bonus drill is a bit naff, but there's more than enough here to keep you satisfied anyway. And yes, there are articulation issues, but newsflash, every figure in this size class has articulation issues. Get used to it, buddy. Conversely, Jetfire's extra tank is fantastic. And that's the problem, you've got an amazing accessory that partners up with a mediocre base figure. I'm sure kids who love Jetfire as a character won't mind at all, but this size class has proven that it can cater to both kids and collectors. That's why I'm so harsh on Jetfire. He has the potential to be amazing, as seen in both the lineup and his very own accessory, but they didn't even bother. As such, he's outclassed by the parts-forming vehicle he comes with. That's pretty sad.
At this point, I've only covered half the lineup so far, but the other three figures are definitely just as fun as these. Well, maybe not just as fun, but they're still pretty damn fun in their own right. I tell you, when these dudes first came out, I was really excited. It was opening the doors for so many possibilities in this size class, especially with the full-scale characters. Like, imagine a Bumblebee or a Windblade or an Optimus Prime done in this scale. Unfortunately, that never happened. The designers decided to save those for some of the larger packages, which, ironically, ended up worse than the Legends guys here. Articulation issues are pretty acceptable on a figure of this size, but on a full-blown deluxe, the f you talking about? Plus, the combined modes incorporated a lot of automorph. Great for the kids, but not necessarily for collectors. Of course, none of that really matters in the end. My critique is useless because I'm not the target demographic. Kids ate that shit and this shit up, so I guess at least we'll get Generations figures of Cyberverse characters in 20 years' time. The line was a resounding success, so who cares how the fandom perceived it? Well, in some respects, I do. At least when it comes to the battle class lineup. I don't care because I hate what they're releasing. Far from it. I instead acknowledge that there are hidden gems amongst the piles and piles of cheaply produced, gimmick-laden shrapnel. I care because, with a few exceptions, these figures are exceptional, and any Legends collector would be stupid to pass them up. Much like the show itself, there's a lot of heart and soul that was poured into these. Heart and soul that was completely ignored. And also like the show itself, I hope one day these are truly recognized for that. I'll tell you what's kind of missing the heart and soul though, tomorrow's review. Yes, for those not aware, this is part of the 4th annual Legendary Marathon. 25 videos, 20 short reviews, 5 full reviews. This is the second of the 5, and tomorrow we're going back to the mini ones. And tomorrow we're tackling someone that might have some connections to microchange, but really, it's more that the designers needed to make some micro changes.